Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to what is going to be pretty unique content here on the Gothamchess YouTube channel. As you all know, I cover all things 64 squares, and I'm always looking to teach you something new. But today, we are going to analyze a movie scene. We're taking a look at Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows when he takes on his arch-nemesis Moriarty on the balcony scene. This game has historical significance. It's actually based on a real game between Bent Larsen, who was one of two players feared during the Soviet regime and the chess boom, except for Bobby Fischer, and his opponent was Tigran Petrosyan, who went on to win the world championship himself. Now, this game was played in 1966, and before we get into the game, let's just take a look at this introductory clip. This is directly taken from the movie. Please don't tell the copywriters, I've muted it. No one snitch. You'll notice the two sit down, and Moriarty begins the game. So Moriarty actually plays the move c4. But what's interesting is that in the actual game itself, the villain is with the black pieces. So the hero is playing with white. So basically they took a game from history and they just inverted the colors for the purposes of the movie. So hopefully that's not confusing. We're going to pretend like Sherlock is playing with the white pieces. So we get e4, c5. This is known as the Sicilian Defense. It is both players trying to fight for the center of the board, just one person doing it with a flank pawn. Bobby Fischer himself played this and this. So you got to be on both sides of the equation. Knight f3, knight c6, and white puts a second pawn in the center of the board, defended by the knight. This is known as the open Sicilian, when white opens up the board with this central pawn trade. Black plays g6, and white responds with bishop to e3, bishop to g7. This version of the Sicilian has many of these versions, is known as the accelerated dragon Sicilian. After c4, we have now went even further into the rabbit hole. This handling of the Sicilian dragon is known as the Marocczy bind, spelled M-A-R-O-C-Z-Y. The point is that you are basically suppressing black's movement in the center with both of your pawns. And the setup that you'd like looks like this. You put your knight behind the c-pawn, then you will play f3, bishop to e2, and you're going to repel black's forces by virtue of your pawn fence. It's a very popular variation. It was played in 1966, and here it is being played 54 years later. Well, I don't know, maybe you're watching in 2028, but it's currently 2021. So black plays knight to g4. Now this move you can take, but if you were to take, your queen now abandons defense of the d4 square. It takes, and white comes right back. This looks like some sort of glitch in the matrix, but it's not. You want to make the knight move, and then you're going to play queen to d2. The queen behind the bishop like this is called a battery, and normally in dragon-style positions, you'd like to trade that dark squared bishop, because if you were to successfully do that, you would remove the bishop from the defense mainly of the king, and there would be some vulnerabilities. So Moriarty responds with d6, Sherlock plays bishop to e2, bishop d7, castles, castles. So both players have finished what's known as their development, and now we begin the middle game. So in a position like this, white has what's called a little bit more space. Space in chess is when you control squares on your opponent's side of the board. You can do that with your pawns. You can also do that with your long-range pieces. In this particular case, it is white who has a little bit more space, centralizes the rook. When you are done with castling, it's now time to bring the rooks into the game. Bishop comes out to c6, and now knight to d5, centralizing. You are more than happy to make this trade, because you will attack the knight, then maybe you will switch the play action to the open file that you will create there. This is what that's called. But in the game, we get rook e8, and now a move f4. So this pawn advancement, and in general in chess, learning how to play with your pawns is super important. And in this case, what white wants to do, white is not moving this just because if black takes, they take back. White is doing this because they have a plan to go f5, since they are supported with their pawn and supported with their rook. They are then going to open the line here for their rook further down the line and have a line of attack at the king. That is how chess is won and lost. You have to attack the king. You also have to pick apart the other pieces, but do remember these are some of the best players in the world. They're not just going to lose all their pieces like you and me. Actually, just you. Knight to c7. That was mean. f5. So white continues to attack, right? White continues mobilizing. White doesn't just take. The person with more space doesn't want to do the trading. They want to keep their pressure. Black plays knight to a6, looking to rotate the knight back around to c5 to target the center pawn. So of course white takes on g6, because if you were to take me here, my queen is hanging, but what's worth more than a queen in chess? The king. So I would go and attack your king, and remember that rook from a long time ago? Well, now I'm winning. Because I'm going to win your rook, it's going to be check, and then I will save my queen, so I'll go material up. So knight to c5, white takes, black takes back, and now white goes queen f2. White uses a concept known as danger levels, lining up again what's called a battery, queen and rook or queen and bishop together on the same file or diagonal, and we're going down to f7. Black plays rook f8. There's nothing really else that black can do. At this point, white plays e5. Now there's a cool variation here that white could have played but didn't, and I wanted to show this to teach you all something. White could have played bishop to c5. And if you take back, first of all, we can take again, but white can also play knight to f6. You say, Levy, that's really dumb. I just take that. Yeah, but when the knight moved, the rook opened up and sees the queen. That's known as a discovered attack. And if we were to get takes, white would say, oh, look at me, I have a queen. But black, for that queen, has a rook and a bishop, and black has what's called compensation. Because black is going to plant this bishop on d4, defend it with the pawn and the rook, and maybe another pawn, and this bishop laser beams the board. Okay? That bishop square, a square on your opponent's side of the board where you cannot be kicked out of and you exert pressure, that's known as an outpost square. So clearly Bent Larsen evaluated this. Bent Larsen saw this and said, I don't like that. Instead, I'm going to just move my pawn into the middle. If you take me, then I'm going to do that attack, and also your knight now loses a guard. Remember, every time you move a pawn, it gains you something, but also could weaken something it used to protect. So for that reason, Tigran plays bishop takes e5, and you say, why would he do that? Why would he voluntarily do this? Because queen to h4 now. What he did there, Bent Larsen, is he deflected Tigran's bishop out to e5. And now he's going to infiltrate on squares that the bishop used to guard. And then you say, well, why did Tigran even take? Well, if he didn't, the pawn was just going to gobble everything or keep going. So this was just a great move. That's how chess works. Sometimes it's like, well, this is terrible, and this is worse. I got to go with one of the two terrible options. I can't just lose on the spot. Lesser of two evils, or three evils. So bishop takes d5, and now rook takes. Again, very good moment. Why did they take with the rook versus the pawn? Because the rook exerts pressure. You're pinning the pawn to the queen. The pawn is not defending these pieces. So right now, white is threatening bishop takes knight. Because if pawn takes, I win the queen. That's why we got knight to e6. And if you take, I will take and I will attack your rook. That's why rook f3. This concept is known as a rook lift. So white is bringing the rook up and over to support the queen in its infiltration to h7. There is no need in this position to just get closer with the queen. The queen's not threatening anybody by herself. The second you bring the queen closer, black immediately comes back and attacks it. The queen is safe. Now you bring the reinforcements and then you go. That's how it works. So rook f3. Black plays bishop f6 attacking the queen. Now the queen moves. Black goes back and now we have our movie moment. So there was a potential variation here that could have happened. White here plays an absolutely dynamite move, a gorgeous move, a move that looks impossible. It looks like black has repelled us and now we have to bring our queen back, but it's not so clear. Okay, white plays the move, queen takes pawn. You say, wait a minute, what? The pawn just takes the queen. Now in the game itself, which we will look at later, black played knight to f4. You say, why wouldn't they just take the queen? Well, in the movie, that's exactly what happens. Black took the queen. I apologize. Black took the queen. And that is why I'm going to now pull up our clip. Because at this point, I will voice it over so we don't get copyright struck. Moriarty says, it seems that you've lost your most powerful piece. And Sherlock responds, a winning strategy sometimes necessitates sacrifice. Very dramatic, right? And now Sherlock plays, and now in the movie it cuts to, you know, the whole scene that's going on, and Sherlock kind of begins showing the point. He plays bishop takes knight check. Now at this point, after bishop takes knight check is played, Moriarty has already gotten up. And I will fast forward in that clip. He takes the knight and he says it right here. Bishop takes knight check, and Moriarty says, the game is over, you should go get your shoulder checked out. No spoilers, but Sherlock's shoulder is pretty messed up at this point in the film. And then they start having a conversation and they say the moves out loud to each other. So Moriarty says king to rook 2 because they're using the old school notation. Algebraic notation didn't exist. The board didn't have grids and coordinates and all these things. So it says king to rook 2. And Sherlock, at this point, uncorks a really savage moment in the film, just a short while later in this dialogue, and he says, rook to rook 3, check. And this is when he starts going into, his whole monologue, right? So he says rook to rook 3, check. And all of a sudden, it's like, wait a second. All of white's pieces are swarming the king. The king has nowhere to go. So Moriarty has to play bishop to h6. Now, normally, when you can take a piece with a check or not, you take it with the check. The problem is, black would just go here. And now you have no more checks. And once black's queen mobilizes, it's going to be bad news. That's why Sherlock stays patient. Sherlock takes with the bishop, threatening a discovered check on the king. Frankly, bishop takes rook is a mate. Literally. Bishop takes rook is mate in one, just the way the king is. So Moriarty snaps off a move himself. He plays rook to f5, sacrificing the rook for the benefit of his position. Now again, you normally take with what's worth less. But Sherlock takes with the rook. Pawn takes, and now it's not about taking with check. It's about cutting off the king's circulation. And we get bishop to f7. Now the king can only go here. Moriarty plays queen check. And what's funny is that in the movie dialogue, Moriarty says queen takes knight's pawn. But there is no knight's pawn. That's just queen to knight 6 is the way that would work. So, or queen to knight 3. So queen takes, and now king to h1. Moriarty takes the pawn on b2, as I can only imagine, because actually the dialogue for this move is cut out. And now at the very end, once Sherlock has uncorked his master plan, Sherlock says bishop to bishop 8, because that is where the bishop is standing on the home square. Bishop to bishop 8, discovered check. And incidentally, mate. And then, chaos ensues. So that actually is a beautiful sequence that could have happened from the game. And that's everything the game is based on, except in the movie, Sherlock is playing with the black pieces. But that is literally the game. They found this game and they just flipped the color and they kind of reenacted it. So, they talk out this whole sequence and it's all correct. That's the crazy part. The queen sacrifice, bishop takes knight check, king to rook 2, rook to rook 3, check, and then bishop takes bishop, rook to bishop 5, and then, so definitely go rewatch that scene. It will make you understand the scene better. But I also promise you that in the game itself, this didn't happen, which is even more impressive in a way, because think about that. That means that the people consulting the show on this chess scene found a game where what didn't actually transpire could have transpired and it was in the film. Not what did happen, but what could have happened. It just shows you the intricate detail that some of these amazing films put together. In the game itself, black played knight to f4 because black saw this, and knight to f4 is designed to sacrifice the knight and then take the queen, but we get bishop check anyway. Now rook blocks, that's the difference. In the game, the rook blocks. Rook takes f7 again, staying patient. Setting up the discovered attack. And now king to h8 and rook to g5. A beautiful game from Bent Larsen. Just down a queen, but the 4 pieces swarm the king's safety. b5 was played. I mean, there's really not much you can do because you can't even activate your queen because the rook covers. Like, for example, queen a5 trying to get in here, just rook takes queen. So the rook controls all these squares. We got b5, rook goes back to g3, not even taking the pawn, drop back, go over, and rook g3 is where the game ended. The only way for black to survive mate here is to play queen g8, rook h3, block, sacrifice your queen, but the problem is that now you are in what's known as a pin, and all pinned pieces, you should try to put them under pressure, and here white is up a bishop, and at this level of the game, black would have resigned. But black did resign after rook g3 got played. A beautiful, beautiful game where Bent Larsen at this point started the same side attack, realizing that he's got piece superiority on this side of the board. He's got all his pieces playing. He pawn storms, right? Activates all his pieces, makes that pawn trade, and infiltrates with the queen. Reroutes the queen to the king side. Rook lifts and pawn sacrifices, makes the right trade, knight for bishop, infiltrates. And, well, this queen takes g6 moment is what that movie is based on. But I wanted to make this video because I watched this movie many, many years ago, and back then there were not a lot of resources. I've been a chess player my whole life, but there's not been a lot of resources to kind of double-check these things. And in many chess scenes in films, there's errors. The board is set up wrong, or in a show, the board is set up wrong. So I wanted to take a look, and I was inspired. I was inspired by what I saw, so Hopefully that was fun. I've put the game in the description if you'd like to go take a look on chessgames.com. Great website with many historical games. If you are new to the channel, welcome. It's so great to meet you. I have a ton of other chess content here for you to enjoy. Feel free to do so. Check out some of my playlists. And of course, if you are a longer time viewer, well, welcome back. Hopefully you enjoyed this bit of unique content. I usually don't put out things like this, but that's it for me. I'll see you in the next video.